recorded. Just started it, so reminded myself to get started with the recording. And the webinar will be made available at some point at the EALTA website as a resource. And as well, if you want to have access to the webinar before that, just let me know. I can send you a link. All right. So Maria, can I hand over to you then? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks
yes.
a lot.
Okay, thank you for introducing. Welcome again to everyone. Welcome to those who are new to this webinar, and welcome back to those who are returning. As Tobias just said, the topic this year is about creating CFR aligned sign language testing. So we will have 3 presentations, the first of which will be held by Claudia Harsch from the University of Bremen. Claudia will be talking about overview of steps involved in developing CFR aligned tests. During her speech, I will be uploading the program of the day, so you will have a rough idea of how the talks will be organized. Consider that the talk will be about 20 minutes length, and then after each speech you will have 10 minutes time in which you can ask questions directly to the speaker. If you do want to indulge in further discussions or questions, etc., we will have extra 30-40 minutes at the end of all of the presentations, where we can we will open the floor again to further questions or discussions by anyone in the webinar. So if you do want to add some further insight, please do at the end of the 3 presentations, if you cannot talk immediately. We will also have a break after about 1 hour time of the webinar, so for all of us to rearrange. So that will be a 10 minutes break. Also, I will ask you if you can, at the end of the webinar, if you can just hold on a few more minutes to reply to a questionnaire that we normally deliver at the end of the webinar. It is very important for us to collect your answers to the questionnaire, as these will make the baseline for the next year's edition of the webinar. So if you do have some insights or feedbacks, please wait till the end of the webinar and reply to the questionnaire. So without further ado, I would call Claudia Harsch to turn on her video and microphone. Hello, there you are. Welcome,
Maria.
Claudia. So I'm happy to hand over the table to you for your presentation, overview of steps involved in developing CFR line tests. Thank you very much, Claudia, for being here today with us.
Thank you, Maria and Tobias, for having me. I feel very honored. And I have about 20 minutes input on different steps involved if you want to develop tests that are aligned to the CFR. Can my presentation be seen okay? Yeah. Can you all see the presentation? Yeah, cool. All right. What I aim for the next 20 minutes is to get together the testing cycle, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the cycle of test development. And I would like to get that together with the alignment cycle. And I guess many of you are also familiar with the different steps of aligning materials to the CFR from the alignment handbook and from the manual. And today I want to bring those together. Okay, somehow it's not. Here we go. First of all, I would like to explore with you what we mean when we say we want to align a test. And we could, for example, think of the test itself, the items, the tasks. their cognitive demands, the topics, the communicative activities, and the linguistic competences they elicit. If that's what we want to align, then we need to develop local test specifications. And here we need to adapt the CFR. And then we need to specify our locally developed tests with the help of the CFR descriptors. And for both the test specifications and for specifying our own tasks, we need a good level of familiarity with the descriptive system and the scales of the CFR. And here you're in a very good position. You have the project called ProSign, and they have developed an amazing online tool. If you go here to tools at the ECML, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the ProSign project, for every of the levels of the CFR, you find the different competences, and for each of the competences, you find sub-skills, and for each of the sub-skills, you then find the descriptor. Here, for example, for the vocabulary range scale under the competence processing test for the level A1, you find the descriptor has a basic established vocabulary repertoire of isolated words and phrases related to particular concrete situations. So first step is get familiar with this system. That's a precondition for developing any CFR-aligned tests. And then, interestingly enough, we have phrases here like related to particular concrete situations, meaning it's not very concrete, it's not very particular. And these are the aspects that you as a test developer have to fill in by localizing this descriptor and making it specific for your concrete situation. And that's one of the challenges we face. We need to adapt the CFR for our local test development. We all know the CFR, its scales and the descriptors, they're a common framework with common meta language, common reference levels, but they're unspecific as you've just seen. They are not directly usable in teaching or assessment. There are no rating scales. You first have to go into your local context, analyze the local needs, the specific learning context, the target language use that your learners are to master, and your specific assessment needs. Is it a placement test? Is it a proficiency test? What is your purpose of the test? Once you've analyzed your local context, then you can go and come up with one possible interpretation of how you, in your context, interpret the CFR. You may have a local construct, you may have specific competences that you look into, you may have specific tasks, approaches, criteria that you want to assess, and you will come up with differences to the CFR in the wording of your descriptors in the assessment criteria. And that's normal, that's fine, that's local test development. And all these local adaptations, you best develop and document in your test specifications. And the test specifications, I'm sure many of you know what they are. They describe, they define what a test tests and how it sets out to do so. And you can have different specifications for different audiences. You may have test specifications for the developers, for the test takers, for school inspectors, for test users. Depends on who you want to address. And usually they serve three main purposes. They guide the test development, and that's the most important for us here. You need a blueprint. You need a guide towards how to develop your tests. Then they also form the basis for any validation research, and they can inform potential test users. And usually you cover the test's purpose, the target group, the areas and content covered. And then in blue here, the targeted skills, competences, and abilities, your construct. And that's where you can use the CFR descriptors. That's where you localize them, and that's where you define what is it that my test wants to test. Is it only vocabulary range, or is it also interactional competences? That goes in here. And then you specify the approaches, the tasks, the aspects of administering and scoring, as well as interpretation and reporting aspects and intended WASH-spec. All this can go into test specs. And again, there is an example from the ProSign document project. And I'm not sure, can you see the PDF now? I'm not sure whether you can see my screen.
Receive the slides, Claudia.
That's what I thought. Okay. Let me find out how to do that. Bildschirm 2. Okay, let's do it this way. Can you now see a document that says test specifications?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, and that's the test specifications from the ProSign vocabulary size test. And here you see one example for test specifications. That's the purpose of the test, the placement test, learn a target group, sections of the test, type of materials. And number 5 is what I'm really interested in with you today, the language skills and elements. And here there was the advantage that the items of these tests, they're already developed. They have been in existence. They're samples from existing DSGS teaching materials targeting CFR level A1. But if you go and develop new test specs and a new test, this is where you would list the different aspects from the CFR. What levels, what competencies, what sub-skills, what scales are relevant, what descriptors do you want to measure with your test? And that's where they would go. And this is an example of test specs. And here under number 5, that will be where you specify exactly what aspects of the CFR you would cover in your test. All right, going back to the presentation, and I hope you can see now my presentation again where it says specifying tasks and items.
Yes, we do.
Cool. So the next step would be if you either have already existing tests or you develop new ones, you as a test developer, you want to specify every single task, every single item. And here we have an example test from the yes/no vocabulary test. Again, you find this under the ProSign project. And this is one of the examples of the test specs that I've just shown you. This is one of these items for the placement test. And if you now were to specify this test, you would go to YouTube and watch this, and then you would decide what CFR descriptor best matches what a learner has to do or needs to know to solve this item. At which level would the learner be? And which of the descriptors would best match this? And here again, to answer this question, to specify this task, you could use again the toolbox for the ProSign language and then read, for example, the A1 descriptor and decide, is that the best descriptor for vocabulary range that specifies this item? And I have one more form which I can share with you afterwards if you're interested. I'm not going there now. You could have a task specifier in the form of a Word document where you collate all the information related to one item or one test. We can look into that later. So basically what we have looked at the moment is if we want to align the tests, items, and tasks, then we can develop test specifications. We can specify our tests. These are 2 steps that are necessary, and we need to be familiar with the CFR. We can also look at the rating scales and the checklists used for interactive and productive tasks. We could align the descriptors and the levels of the scale to the CFR. And in order to use the rating scales validly and reliably, we would need benchmarking. And again, I found with the ProSign project, a rating scale for the assessment of the interaction test, and I just give you an excerpt here. So for example, there's a criteria size and mastery of sign vocabulary or grammatical correctness, and you find this described on a 4-point scale. Now, if you wanted to align this rating scale to the CFR, then the question would be, which descriptor forms the basis for the rating scale descriptors? And what is the intended relation between the rating scale points from 1 to 4 and CFR levels? That could be one approach. You don't have to do it this way, but if you wanted to align a rating scale to the CFR directly, then it would be important to clarify where do the descriptors come in from the CFR and what do these points mean in relation to the CFR. Does a mastery at 4 points mean this is level B1 of the CFR? So these aspects you would need to specify. That would be the first step of aligning a rating scale to the CFR. And we can either align the tests, the rating scales to the CFR, or at the end, we can align the scores or test results to the CFR. And that requires a large enough sample. So we need test takers here, we need empirical data, and we need some statistical knowledge. You can get experts into here. Normally, it's not the test developers who do the score alignment, but experts, because that's quite a formal and complex endeavor. It's called standard setting, and I'm sure many of you have already experience with standard setting. And just to simplify the whole process, you have your test items. They have been developed with the use of test specifications. You have specified them in terms of CFR level that you think they target. You give these to learners, and then you have perhaps a rating scale and you have test scores. And then you need a statistical expert who IRT scales your data so that on this scale, you have the students, their abilities, and you have the difficulties of the test items. So a test coming in at the top of the IRT scale is a difficult test, and the students coming in up here are those very competent tests, and tests down here at the bottom of the IRT scale are the easy tests, and students down here are those who are not yet very competent. And then comes the standard setting. That's human beings who decide where does one level of the CFR end and the next level begin. And we won't have time to look into that today, but that's just an outlook. It's humans who judge the test difficulties and the student abilities, and they judge where does one level end and the next one begin. So we've now looked into the what: tests, rating scales, or scores. That's 3 possibilities. You can do one of them or all 3 of them. And now let's look at the how. How can we align a test? And here we have the CFR Alignment Handbook, published 2 years ago, that complements the manual from the CFR that you may be familiar with. And it has 5 different phases. The familiarization. So all participants need to be familiar with the CFR levels and descriptors. We have the specification phase. So we need to describe and profile the content of the language test in relation to the categories of the CFR. That's what I meant by specify all your tasks. Then we have the phase of the standardization, meaning all the item developers, all the raters, all the judges need to have the same understanding of what the CFR level means for your local test. And then we have the standard setting. That's what I just outlined, where human judges decide where one level ends and the other one begins. And then we have the validation phase. That actually is a phase that goes through all the other phases, where we collect and present appropriate evidence to support our alignment claims. So when we look at the when in the test development process, good news, you already got a lot of input on the testing cycle. I'm not going into that. That's out there on the ProSign pages, and every step is described in signed language. So that's a really good resource bank. What I'm going to do today is to differentiate a little bit in this test development process and cycle, what needs to be done in terms of familiarization, specification, standardization. And I've added a few more steps. I've disentangled it a little bit more. So we start with the test. And in the beginning, we may have planners and designers who develop a rationale. They look at the constraints and the purpose of the test. And sometimes they also develop the test specifications. These planners and designers, they need to be familiar with the CFR, and they need to be involved in a specification phase. Then comes the next phase, where item writers write the content, the tasks, the items, and perhaps also the scoring guide and the rating scale. And the item writers need to be familiar with the CFR. They need to be involved in the specification, in the test specs, in specifying what each task addresses in terms of the CFR categories and levels. And we need also a certain standardization among the item writers, that everybody understands what a C1 or a B1 test looks like for the local context. Then we continue into a pilot study. That's usually done by somebody who collects the data. It's often not the item writers, so I'm not going to go into this here. Then we have data that need to be scored by raters and scorers. And these, again, need to be familiarized with the CFR and with the tasks and with the rating scales. And they need benchmarking exercises in order to be standardized, to understand what a C1 performance in a given test looks like. Then we analyze the data and perhaps we revise our tasks. I won't go into that in more detail. Then we go into the main study. And again, the main study needs to be rated and scored. And if the raters and scorers are different from those in the pilot study, you have to familiarize and standardize them again. And then we have the data. You remember my overview where I said we have the rating scale, we have the test scores, then we do an IRT scaling, and then we go into standard setting. And that's this phase now. Usually you get external judges. They look at your tasks, they look at your rating scale, they look at your students, and then they decide at which CFR level has a learner got to be in order to solve this item. And for that, you need to familiarize the judges with the CFR, with all your materials. You need standardization amongst the judges. They need to have the same understanding of what C1 performance in your test means, and then they can do the standard setting. And the outcome of the standard setting helps you with reporting and interpretation of your local test, because then you can say a score of 20 points in my local test means my test takers are at level B1. And then you can go into the final phase, training of the testers. They again need to be familiarized and standardized so that they all have the same understanding, and then you can deliver your test. I know it's a complex process, nothing is easy, but not every test has to undergo all of these phases. It depends on your local context and the stakes of your test. And then if it's a high stakes test, you want to do validation research, you want to collect evidence of every single step you do, and you want to document this evidence. And the higher the stakes of a test, the more validation evidence you want to document and the more evidence you want to collect. And then we go, oh, we're not going anywhere, are we? Yeah, I have just 2 or 3 more slides. We want to go a little bit into more depth into the familiarization, because that may be of most importance for you guys here. In the handbook, they have 5 steps of familiarization. Familiarize yourself with the key aspects of the CFR, the descriptive scheme, salient features, relevant scales, and then do a summary and document. And for you, that could mean read the documents, familiarize yourself with the scales for signed languages from the ProSign that I've shown you earlier. They're really a great resource bank. Then decide for your local context what competences are most relevant for your context, for your assessment, at which levels are your learners, and then select the most relevant descriptors for your test and purposes, and document the outcomes. The handbook offers you a form in which you can document the familiarization phase. And then you can look into the specification phase. And here you look at questions like what local learning aims are to be assessed by your tasks. Hopefully you have the aims already in the curriculum or in test specifications, perhaps in the form of adapted CFR descriptors. And then you can develop your tasks with regard to these CFR related aims. So you take the construct and operationalize it into your tasks. Once you have the tasks, then you specify them, and you can then, as we said earlier, you can then look at the task and decide which CFR descriptor best matches what a learner has to do in order to solve these tasks. And these specifications can help any external judges to see whether they agree with your specification, with your estimation at which CFR level this task is. You could also ask your learners or other colleagues to help you specify the task with regard of the selected CFR descriptors, and all this is already part of validation. And usually that's a phase where you as an active teacher are also involved. And I am not going into the other phases because they are usually done by an institution. You need statistical support, and I think familiarization and specification may be the most important for you here. And you also can document the outcome of the specification phase. There is a form in the handbook that you may use, or you develop your own forms to document the outcomes here. And looking at the time, I like to sum up with implications for developing tests in alignment with the CFR. If you ever conduct such an endeavor, or you are the colleague responsible in a test development project at your local school, then allow everybody to get familiar with the CFR and materials in their own ways and in their own pace. You need time for that. Choose a collaborative, hands-on approach. Have activities that make people use the CFR descriptors. Pre-select perhaps relevant scales, because you'll see the toolbox is huge. There's loads of descriptors. You may want to pre-select to make life easier. You may want to use other sources relevant for your context in a complementary way. You may have curricula that are relevant. You may have module descriptions, learning aims that are relevant. Use them in a complementary way. Document all steps transparently, and to ensure constructive alignment so that your assessment matches your curriculum and matches what is happening in the classroom. Co-develop learning goals, curricula, and assessment goals. Have in mind your curricula and the learning goals when you develop your assessment, so that they match each other and they are constructively aligned. And make use of the handbook. I found this really helpful when it was published. Have a look how it can help you with explanations, activities, tools, guidelines for reporting, and a lot of practical suggestions. And this brings us to the end of my talk. Many thanks. Happy for any questions.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for staying in the due time. Sorry. Thank you very much for staying in the time. I realized that I did not properly introduce you, so probably it's a good time to do so. I apologize. I've been blocked from entering from firewalls, so I'll just catch up on that right now. Claudia Harsch is a professor at the University of Bremen, specializing in language learning, teaching, and assessment. She's worked in Germany and in the UK, and she's active in teacher training worldwide. Her research interests focus on areas such as language assessment, language and migration, the development of language assessment literacy, and the implementation of the CFR. Claudia is the current president of the International Language Testing Association and was also the president of the European Association of Language Testing and Assessment from 2016 to 2019. So again, a very precious resource for us to have today. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
My pleasure.
So while you were speaking, Tobias also included some link to the resources that you mentioned. So for those of you who were particularly following the interpreters, you will find links to all the materials in the chat area. I'm not quite sure, Tobias, confirm if we will also hand out the presentations or not. I don't remember what is our standard behavior
Yes,
in that.
that's a plan. That's a plan.
Okay. In all cases, you will have the access to the registration of the webinar online after a few days after the end of the webinar. So anyone who have questions for Claudia, you can either turn on your video if you want to ask in sign language, or you can write on the chat, or you can speak. Choose the language of your choice. There is probably an initial embarrassment, as in any online or in presence seminar. So I will ask a question also because I've worked on the CFR adaptation myself back in 2011 to 2014. So of course, it's a great pleasure and also great satisfaction to see how the whole work that not just me, but all the researchers in Europe did around adapting the CFR for sign language has actually turned into practical materials that are now used across Europe. So this is of course, is a great pleasure for me. As you were speaking, a memory returned to me about how to adapt the descriptors to meet specific training needs. So if you would like to go a little more in depth on that, I think it would be interesting for those who are probably working on this topic for the first time, and they probably have specific training needs in mind, like for interpreters or similar kind of training, and they have these general descriptors that talks about familiar context or other things. So it would probably be useful to talk a little more about this. How can we really, what does it mean to adapt a descriptor?
Yeah, that's sometimes people fear to make the CFR their own and change anything, but it's a workbench, it's a tool, it's meant to be adapted. And I had this one example of the A1 vocabulary range descriptor where it says phrases related to particular concrete situations. And that's the point where you can take the particular concrete situations and outline what that is. What are concrete situations that your learners of signed languages are having to master? What are you preparing them for? Will they be interpreters? Will they do it for whatever situation in their private life because they have friends or family they want to converse with? What are these particular concrete situations? And for your test, you can spell out what these are. And you can do that for each and every descriptor that you find helpful. And you specify exactly what it is in which communicative situations, what aspects your learners are going to master. And that's where you also see where the local curriculum comes into place. That's what I mean when I say combine all other relevant sources. Maybe you have these situations in your curriculum, in your module description, in your course description. Then you can use it to concretize the CFR descriptors and put that into your test specs. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. It was often the case when we started to discuss these adaptation that, you know, when we compare teaching sign language to teaching spoken language, normally in spoken language, these familiar contexts are related like to shopping or going to I don't know, very informal settings, have basic conversations with people, often combining speech with gestures. But then, you know, when we're talking about full gestural language, then, you know, this combination sort of fall out of place. So it's always interesting to see how things can actually be, how the CFR can actually be a valuable tool for many situations. So I see there's a question from Alessio Di Renzo. Do you want to ask your question yourself, or do you want me to read it from the chat? Okay.
I'd like to go ahead and sign.
Okay.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So hello, my name is Alessio. Some faces I know, some are new. So hello, I really appreciated your presentation. I have two questions. I've summarized my question in the chats, but I'd like to elaborate here in IS. So when looking at the CEFR adaptation, you are giving us a process to go through or giving some ideas, and it's indeed a very complicated process. And there's models for the CEFR adaptation that I've looked at. We are coming from our language, our local language, our local sign language. And we're looking at also different modalities. And there are different teacher requirements for minority languages. I do see that there is, you know, some emerging information about how to adapt our testing and to different types of processes to SEPR, but I'm wondering how we can streamline this work that we're doing. How can we cooperate more within Europe or globally on the adaptation process? That's one of my questions. And I am a sign language teacher. And as a teacher, we also have native sign language teachers. We have hearing sign language teachers. We have different ideas on who can be a sign language teacher in the United States. They are very adamant that it is our native sign language and it's only ours. Whereas there are other hearing people that I feel like are going forward with this subject, but we haven't had really a cooperation between hearing and deaf sign language teachers. So I'm wondering your points of view on how we can better cooperate as a community. Those are my two questions.
Yeah, big questions. I guess one of the steps you're already doing is coming here together in that SIG. I think this is a brilliant way of collaboration because you can exchange on different needs you have, different requirements, and also different experiences with making the CFR relevant locally. So that's the first part of your question. I'm not sure whether we can streamline the adaptation process of the CFR, because every context is different and every local context has different requirements. So I guess what all can benefit from is sharing an experience of how did we do it and publishing the experience, for example, to share it with more people. And then we've done that for rating scales, which I have developed with Cuban colleagues for a test in Cuba, and what we have done here in Bremen. And we share what we do, we share our challenges and how we face them and how we solve them. And that's how we try and cooperate. And I guess it's pretty similar for the signed languages field. I guess it means exchanging your experiences, exchanging what you found difficult and how you overcame it so that others can learn from it. And the second part of your question, that's a good one where I may have not an answer because I have to admit I haven't worked in signed languages and I'm not familiar with the different requirements, but it just chimes with a discussion that people have on can we recruit native speaker teachers or not? And in at least in the Anglo-Saxon world, I haven't seen for a long time any job adverts that use the native speaker category. So in the hearing teacher profession, they are going away, at least in English, from the native speaker requirement. And I have no idea whether similar discussion is held among the signed language teacher community. I guess that's something that the community here may perhaps in a better position to answer.
Thank you very much, Alessio. I see he's thanking as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alessio, for the question, and Claudia for your speech and for the answer. I see there's also another link to a work in Czechia for the adaptation of Czech Sign Language. I think this is for the good of everyone who is following. I would kindly ask Claudia and also Alessio to stay until the end so we can probably go a little farther into this discussion at the end of the webinar. Again, thank you, Claudia, for your speech. I will now call to our table Carmel Graham. Carmel is an assistant professor at the Center for Deaf Studies at TCD, Trinity College Dublin, where she contributes to teaching within the Bachelor in Deaf Studies program. Her work in mapping the Irish Sign Language curriculum to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages and piloting the use of European Language Portfolio for Sign Languages demonstrate her commitment to advancing sign language education and supporting sign language instructors across the Council of Europe. She also serves as the program director for the Bachelor in Deaf Studies. So Carmel will be giving her presentation in sign language, Irish Sign Language. So, okay, I see you. There you are. So thank you again for being here today with us, and the floor is to you. Thank you.
Sorry, now just adjusting my screen. Sorry, I thought I was going third in the order, so I didn't realize that was the second presentation. No, so no problem, just adjusting my setup here. So I was thinking about presenting this in International Sign, but I was just a bit hesitant and decided that I would prefer to present in my first language, which is Irish Sign Language. So I hope that nobody minds if I present in ISL instead today. So I just need to get my PowerPoint on. I don't know, do I need to share the PowerPoint myself?
You need help with the presentation?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find where I can share my PowerPoint. Did I send it on to somebody or will I share it from my own side?
You did share it, but if you want, you can share it from your own side. It's up to you, whatever is more convenient to you.
I will share. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Tobias.
Give me a moment.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. So if you can make that full screen for me, great, thank you so much. So sorry for that disruption there. So I know the discussion that we're all having today is around the CEF4, but I would also like to bring in and just kind of adjust and turn a little bit towards the ELP, the language portfolio. Just checking that I can see my interpreter there. So the European language portfolio, the ELP, is somewhat similar and has a relation to the CEF4. Obviously, CEF4 is related to teaching and how we teach, as was brought up in the previous presentation. But I also like to talk about the ELP and how I would use that in my teaching. So really, the ELP is a tool for assisting students in their self-assessment throughout their language learning journey, you know, talk about their culture and their experiences. And there are 3 different areas that try to focus the independence and encourage the students to build up their 3 core competencies. You know, they have their language dossier, their language passport, and language biography. And there's also a checklist as well, an I can checklist as well that can be used. And I really like the theories and the principle in that. So today for my presentation, I would like to talk about how, and thank you for moving the slide. I really wanted to look at the students and language learners and what they do and what we can do to support their learning. So previously, we would have left students alone in their lab and do their work. We would have our own teaching as teachers, but we would worry a little bit about the students' motivation. You know, are the students really capable of doing that self-assessment? Are they doing the self-assessment? Can they judge that accurately? Because obviously we have very limited teaching time and it's very difficult to, of course, I'm at full-time in university, but it can be very difficult to look at the students doing their own work and to encourage that and support them in that while also maintaining the other work that we have to do, but we need to know how we can support them, how to give their feedback, and how to build and maintain the students' motivation, their confidence and their understanding, and really encourage them to be able to do that self-assessment. So I really wanted to merge the teaching that we did and also the students, the self-assessment, the work that they can do in their own lab time where they would be doing their own work. So that's what I'm going to try and talk about today. So can we go to the next slide? So really, when we talk about the CEF4, that's very learner-centered, because of course the teachers can't know everything about each individual, and which means that the students kind of, you're focusing on just teaching vocabulary. You know, I think sometimes we have to change the structure a little bit to make the students be able to access it more accessible. And obviously in the CEF4 we talk about the themes and the thematic approach that we have there, and the breakdowns into sub-themes and very specific areas, and how it can be broken down, the curriculum, so that the students have to kind of be more elective in the vocabulary that they're learning, and so they can really own their learning. And I will talk about that a little bit more later. But of course, it is learner-centered when we talk about the CEF4, but we really want the students to be independent and encourage that own self-assessment as well, and have that autonomy. So as I said, I'm a full-time lecturer in a university, and the way my schedule works is we have 4 hours per week in the first semester. So there's 11 weeks in the semester, which means that we would teach 4 hours every week for those 11 weeks. So I would have 4 hours of teaching time, and then the students would also have 4 hours of lab time, which means that I would teach something in class, whether it be a topic that we would do, and then I would then give students work to do that by themselves, their homework that they would go off and do in their lab time, and then submit it back to me. So before we had the ELP, we just kind of left the students to their own devices. They were off to do the lab work, and I really saw it affected the students' motivation, and it wasn't working as well. So I thought I really wanted more of a connection between the teaching that we were doing and the lab work that the students were doing, which is why I decided to bring on the ELP and to use those methods. And I think it really worked really well. I've started that about 4 years ago, and it has worked really well. So as you can see on the slide here, I just have to break them down, and we have the continuous assessment that's linked to the classroom activities. And so when I was teaching second year students, we were kind of aiming for them to be the B1 or B2 level on the CEF4. So I was trying to think, how would I use the ELP for those students? So on the next slide, there are some themes that I decided to use for that level, that class. So the themes that I decided on, of course, I was looking at CEF4 and the ELP together, and really it's talking about their lived world experience, and I really wanted to bring that into the classroom to make sure that students could all relate to the theme. So we decided to have a class presentation. So there'd be 2 in the first semester and 2 in the second. So the first week was famous buildings in Ireland was the first topic for the presentation, because we were in Ireland, and then a famous Irish person as well. And then the second 2 would be linked to the deaf community or the deaf world. So not just Ireland, but a deaf. So we would do deaf celebrity, a famous, it didn't have to be from Ireland, but they're just a deaf celebrity, and then an organization as well that could be from Ireland or from anywhere around the world. So they were the themes. So they were given to the students 6 weeks before the presentation was expected. On the first day, they were given the themes. So the first one that I'll focus on is, like, for example, the famous buildings in Ireland. So the students had the time to pick that. They chose the famous building themselves. Like, one picked the Guinness Storehouse, which is a very famous building here, which is on the next slide. Oh, sorry, next slide again. Yes, so this example here, so one of the students picked this famous building for their presentation. So they talked about the Guinness Storehouse where Guinness is made, and you know, others might have picked Trinity College, but they picked things that were linked to Ireland, a famous building in Ireland. So they were able to select it themselves and then continue to work on the project leading up for those 6 weeks. And if we could just go back to the previous slide. So when I was trying to design this and think about the lab work and how they were going to do that, so I decided to use the task-based approach. So that meant that the students were we looked at the pre-task, the task, and then also post-task, which meant the students pre-task, they would discuss the topics, they would do their research, they would look at various websites and start preparing for their presentation. They would look at vocabulary that they might need for the presentation. And then I would also meet with the groups for about 15 minutes and we would discuss their ideas for their presentation, and I would just encourage them to do some independent learning to really get that motivation there. But by also knowing that they have the teacher support, I was there to support them, but they could do that learning independently. And then we also looked at the reflection as well, to look back on, try preparing for the presentation. So for one example, I'll use the Guinness factory, and that was brought up. So the students would kind of show me their structure that they had. Like they would say, oh, I'll talk about the history when the company was established. It was back in the 1700s. And, you know, and I was saying, but what if somebody asks you, what is it? Is it, where is it? You know, that kind of basic things that really made them reflect on the structure that they had already planned for their presentation and go back as a group and discuss it again. They might need to adjust that. And I think it was very important that that was done within the group. And then the next step was the presentation, which was recorded, which was done through Irish Sign Language. And then after that, they were given a self-assessment. So there was 2 different parts to the self-assessment. So if you can just go to the next slide, or the next again. Oh, sorry, that was just another example of a student picked as a deaf celebrity. So that's just another example. You can move on to the next slide. So really, this obviously was linked to our university's marking systems and also the CEF4 also. So our students in class, of course, they're doing a bachelor's in deaf studies, so the degree. So we did have to follow the college's metrics also for the continuous assessment. So I know it's quite small on the screen, but there are various different things like phonology, fluency, grammatical control. So there was all those different areas, and altogether it was worth 15%. And if you just move on to the next slide, then this was the second part, which was the group assessment, and that was worth 5%. So a lot of the students did have that, but I think it was sometimes a little bit more difficult previously for the students to understand that. So that's why I adjusted it slightly, just to tie in with the ELP also. And I can just move on to the next slide again. That's just to show you kind of what they had to, what the students had to do. So when the students finished their assessment, they were then given their recording to the students, and then they then had to go off and analyze their own performance. They had to think about their vocabulary, and it was really I really encouraged them to get some variation within their vocabulary, because they were second-year students. You know, they have stepped up a lot from their first year, and it's really also being able to watch their vocabulary, also their facial expressions, their non-manual features, to make sure they were matching everything. And it was important for them to be able to assess that themselves. And it was to also build their own confidence through this assessment. So once they did the self-assessment, they then gave it, I didn't look at it initially. First, I watched the video myself. I didn't look at the student self-assessment because it was 15% for the students. They needed to have an individual assessment. So I would use that video, and I would take note and mark on the students' performance. And obviously, naturally, some of them weren't very confident in their own assessment, but when I looked at it, it was actually quite good. And obviously, I was marking against CEF4, and, you know, maybe if they were trying for a C1 might be a different story, but I think it was really showed me that the students needed that encouragement and that motivation. Some of them were had negative views of themselves. So I would then record a video of myself doing a feedback video and giving them feedback, and I would talk about their own self-assessment and what they had thought of their own performance and what I did. And I really think that helped to build their teamwork and also their confidence. But one thing that I did notice was a huge challenge, which is on the next slide. It was a big challenge for the students when they were working on a group task and they started their self-assessment. They kept only thinking about themselves in the self-assessment. They'd never thought about their team members in the group assessment. So for one example, when I was in observing how they worked together as a group, I did see that some students were discussing and they were researching everything and they were working as a team. But once they started to do the work, they would divide the work up and they would only focus on that bit that had been assigned to them. So they became very focused on themselves. So when I would ask them what was happening, and so, sorry, I know my slides are a bit off. If we can go back 2 slides, sorry. They're slightly in the wrong order. So when it came to the group task assessment, obviously we talked about the presentation and how they work together, their presentation skills, their body language, and there was A and B, but a lot of the students forgot about that. And some of them made lovely PowerPoints. They were brilliant. They put a lot of work into them, but they were looking at the computer the whole time. They didn't look at the audience. They were forgetting that presentation skill. And they were just focused looking at the slide, but some of them hadn't realized that was part of the assessment as well. So for example, once the first person had finished their piece, they would kind of sign their piece, do their part of the presentation, and then once they were done, they were like, okay, thank you, and moved on. There was no connection between them and their teammates. They would each take a turn, but the students had never really realized or thought fully about how they would work as a team and overall. And that was a real part of the ELP that I really tried to support and increase the motivation on that and their understanding of the importance of that. So the second presentation in December of that year, I could definitely see an improvement. It was a huge change. They were more engaged with the culture as a team. And that's why I really strongly believe that the teaching and also using tools like the ELP when you have students who are doing some self-study is really important. I think it's very impossible for any teachers that, you know, we're working and then to be able to check in with the students that are doing their own work and to keep that encouragement there and that marking there. It's important to keep that motivation. It can be tough. Of course, it's normal for all students to lose a bit of confidence while they're learning if they're struggling or having some difficulty. But I think it's very important, especially for students moving on into 3rd year, that they start when they will have to do individual presentations. It's really important to start encouraging students to build on that skills working as a team. So I think I might be finished. We can move back. I might just have one last slide. Yes, my conclusion. So I just really wanted to explain how I try to incorporate the ELP, the European Language Portfolio, into my teaching along with this effort. And I think it's so important for the students that they learn how to self-correct, how to self-assess, but also how to collaborate with other students for future. I mean, some of our students will go on to train as interpreters, as teachers. So I think this is a really strong way of building their confidence. And I think that this is involving the ELP, especially the 1 time a week, and having those strategies included really have the students. So that's it. That's all for me for today. I might have gone off the point a little bit, but I hope happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Carmel, for your very interesting speech, practical experience in the classroom. So I think many of the attendees who are here as sign language teachers can actually relate to your experience a lot. So thank you very much indeed. So if anyone have questions, we have 10 minutes for Carmel. Thank you for staying in the time, although I we sort of messed up the program, so I'm sorry about that. So if you have any question for Carmel, of course, any question is welcome. I'll leave some time for anyone who wants to warm up. You can either use the raise hand function in the reaction section or add your name to the chat if you have questions for Carmel. Okay, there's still a little embarrassment out there, so I will continue with my with the relating. Oh, Tobias, I see you raise hand.
Yeah. Hey, Carmel, thanks a lot. It was a very interesting, inspiring presentation. From a technical point of view, I was wondering, how did you implement the ELP? Is this integrated into the regular learning platform you're using at Trinity College, or how did you do that?
Yes, that's a good question. So we use Blackboard within Trinity College here. So really, I really tried to include the CEF4 in my teaching. I really tried to integrate that and base my teaching methods on that. So as I mentioned before, we had the 2 hours per week. So really to try and cover that, I really tried to use it in the lab time where the students were doing their own work. That was the time, because I just really felt that using the LP helped to build their confidence and those different methods. So obviously I had to kind of follow Blackboard for my teaching time and use the normal kind of structures that we would have there, but it was really as part of their portfolio for their assessment. As I mentioned briefly in my presentation, we have a continuous assessment where the students have a portfolio that they work on throughout the year. So they would sign videos into Irish Sign Language and then submit them for me. So I would just kind of incorporate it into their lab work. So it was, yeah, kind of difficult trying to integrate it in, but it was mainly in the lab work and within their portfolio assessments. And that's where I would really include the ELP. But one problem I found is that I had so many ideas on how to incorporate it, but really getting it in the system and writing that down can be hard, because it's very easy, you know, to kind of stray off from what your original plans. But yeah, that's kind of the aim, was to incorporate into their portfolio assessments.
Thank you, Carmel. We have a few other questions from the chat section. The first is from Tony Bloem. He or she asked how do you do with fourth years level students, ELP or assessment?
So I'm not teaching fourth years currently. So Teresa Lynch is a colleague of mine. She's heavily involved in teaching fourth year level students, and I think she uses both in the same way. Obviously, we have the assessments as mandated by the university, but we also still use the ELP in terms of their lab work, and of course following along with the CEF4 as well, obviously aiming for the B2 productive skills and C1 receptive skills. So, and the various topics, obviously they would talk about more complex topics such as news and various kind of topical things if there's something on, you know, talking about wars, votings, elections, stuff like that. So but I think just relating it to real life situations, I think is one major part that's really important as well. So I hope that answers your question, but I do believe that she does the same in trying to incorporate the ELP into their lab work and their own work they're doing in their self-assessments. So I hope that answers that.
Okay. I believe Tony will probably want to add something on this, so I will ask you to wait till the end of the webinar so that I can give space to other questions. This is for Tony. Ann Baker was also asking, there she is, do students know their appreciation of doing the self-assessment? Do students show do students show their appreciation of doing the self-assessment?
Yes. I think the students really start to realize it. And just to give you through an example, when they're being able to pick the vocabulary that they need and their English, like that, they're picking their own topics, like picking the factory. And I always encourage them to really look at the way when they have questions and stuff like that. I always encourage them to try and answer the questions themselves, you know, not to just come and give them the answers. Of course, I'll support them in that, but I think they really start to understand the value of trying to find the answers to themselves, or whether it's to do with the structure of their presentations or whether that's through feedback. But I think really showing them how to assess themselves and how to look back on their work, I think it really helps to build their confidence, and for the classroom, because I don't want the students to constantly having to depend on me as the teacher to answer everything. I think it's very important to build that awareness of the students that they can find the answers themselves. And I think that when they start to see their results improving through their portfolios and through their assessments, I think they really do start to see the value of it and get on that feedback from themselves and from their peers. I think seeing the results improve over time really shows them the value of that. So I think, yes, they do over time.
I agree with this point, this last point of view, as with the rest of your presentation. Well, thank you very much. If there are no, like we have 2 minutes time, so if there's a very small question, we can still make space for it, or else I would go ahead with our 10 minutes break, which is useful for all of us. So if we're all ready for the break, I will see you back at 2:50. We'll go out for a 10 minutes break. Back at 2:50 with our third presentation for the day. Thank you very much.
do que saiu a tela dele.
Okay, we can start to resume. Getting ready for the third presentation. Okay, they're already. Thank you very much, Leonid and Alexander. Leonid Kleiner, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, and Alexander Straub from the University of Cologne. I will just upload your bio to the chat right now so that everyone can read it while I read it out. So welcome back to everyone. Meanwhile, and there we go. So our next presentation is about development and evaluation of comprehension tasks in German Sign Language at the B1 level. So we have a specific experience at a B1 level. The presentation will be held by Leonid and Alexander. Leonid Kleiner is trained as a sign language interpreter at the University of Hamburg. He is also a certified interpreter for DGS and Russian Sign Language. He has been actively involved in sign language teaching since 2003. While Alexander Straub holds a diploma of Auslan, Australian Sign Language, from Melbourne Polytechnic in Australia. Additionally, he holds a certificate in training and assessment from Queensland Training Association in Australia, and a diploma in disability from Homaxland Institute in Australia. Other previous roles include working as a sign language instructor at Melbourne Polytechnic from 2015 to 2019. I'm supposing your presentation will be in English. Can you confirm? No, in sign language probably.
Yeah, international
Okay.
sign.
Okay, so the presentation will be held in the international sign. Sorry about that. And so again, there you go. The floor is to you.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, interpreter. Okay, just making sure with the interpreter that we're all in sync. Hi, my name is Alexander Straub, and this is Leo Kleiner. We're going to be giving a presentation today on the development and evaluation of a comprehension task for DGS, or German Sign Language, at B1 level. So we're looking at how to evaluate comprehension of students in general. So today, first of all, I want to go over some background, and I'll then go into the development of the reception task. And then we will look at the analysis and our findings. So a bit of background. You can see on the screen here, there are two main squares. This is taken from the University of Cologne Moodle site, and Moodle is an e-learning platform used by many universities. And we have A1 all the way to B1 listed here, and the different sub-levels as well, along with the different tasks. So you have consecutive tasks, you have receptive tasks, you have different types of activities, interactive tasks, you have tasks that the students are expected to do in a lab or at home. And so one example would be that you can see here is, the different classifiers that can be used for a car. So this is within a 5-year program, and we're trying to improve the content, right? So the curriculum, so that it makes it easier for the students to learn. Obviously, with kind of more analog, paper-based things of the past, that doesn't really encourage sign language learners. So we want to make sure to match the videos that we've created with the different content or the different levels. So the students have to do a matching game when they're looking at receptive tests, these kind of crisscross matching games. And that's a great activity that we've used in the past. But you need to do a lot of programming to be able to make these successful to do on a computer rather than to do in a traditional worksheet on a piece of paper. So the activities that we know as sign language interpreters are not easily translated into a digital realm when we're using a platform like Moodle. So I'm just going to give you a few moments to look over the slide before I start to explain the different components. So if you can see this kind of cross-shaped graphic, before we assess the students, and obviously you don't just assess the students off the bat, you need to have things that happen before the assessment, right? So that the assessment becomes part of the student's goal, right? So you plan things to do today or tomorrow. So you want to do things in class or out of class activities, right? So you have different tasks that are assigned, and then you can assess the students based on the tasks that have been given and taught. And here we're looking specifically at receptive skills development. And that can be an ongoing process, of course. So we picked receptive skills tests and tasks because the students seem to be very motivated to want to understand what other people are signing. So you can see the motivation is quite high in receptive tasks. Also, they seem very motivated in terms of self-assessment, right? So they want to know why they're not understanding a certain sign correctly. So they're really eager to go back and look at what the right answer was and determine why they might have guessed it wrong. And this also matches their own evaluation. So when you have a certain video, they want to look at which clip or which part of the video they missed, and they want to be able to assess why they missed that or what they got wrong, what is challenging for them in terms of their understanding of sign language. And as assessors, we can then pinpoint those areas that some of the students have problems with, and then we can emphasize teaching those areas when they're back in the classroom. So I want to give you a little bit of background information about the receptive task that we created. We worked with 2 target groups. So my group was B1.2 learners. There were 28 students in that cohort. Leo's group was B1.3, and there were 21 students in that group. So the receptive test was a topic that I was teaching about the biography and stories of different profiles. So we would tell the students different biographical profiles. And one example was a very well-known deaf man called Gunter Trube. And both of the groups, B 1.2 and 1.3, had to know Gunter's profile, and this is his name sign, by the way. Okay, so I'll let you take a look at this slide quickly. So obviously with receptive skills development, you want to bring in different signers, different profiles of signers, not just the teacher, which was traditionally what happened is students got very used to their sign language teacher signing and then couldn't adapt to other people in the deaf community. So we looked at a lot of different videos, 244 to be to be precise, and thought that these matched the B1 level out of about 800 that we that we looked at, and I'll explain now why we picked these specific videos at the B1 level. We didn't just randomly pick videos. We obviously looked at the CEFR and the B1 descriptors around CEFR. And apologies, I want to allow our deaf participants to look at the slide before I go ahead and explain it. So first of all, Gunter is a very clear signer, and he tells concise stories. So it would be, you know, I think maximum 4 minutes. So nothing like a 10 or 20-minute story. So that really fit the B1 descriptors as well for receptive comprehension. Also could understand unknown words and signs by identifying the context around them. There's a lot of also constructed action used by Gunter, and a lot of also explanation as well, and constructed dialogue as well in there. So we wanted to be able to test the B1 level students on whether or not they can understand when these aspects of signing in DGS were happening. So before we went ahead with the pilot, we needed to obviously create the questions. And we didn't want to come up with questions out of nowhere. So we invited 3 deaf people, 2 native signers, and 1 person who was a late learner, but a very fluent signer, obviously a B2 level or even C level signer. And we had a hearing person watch these signers once, and then we taped them. We recorded all 3 signers with 2 cameras. And we took 4 clips from each of the stories. Okay, so we had basically 4 salient or important pieces of content from each of the stories that they were signing. And that meant that we could create questions from those clips and develop a series of potential answers. And what we did here was we developed a visual multiple choice task. So the questions related to global, selective, or detailed questions to assess the amount of understanding. So then we could assess the students based on these test questions that we developed. So we went ahead, developed the questions and then the potential answers in the multiple choice. And then we again invited the 3 deaf testers to give us some feedback on what we developed. And we tweaked it based on their feedback. And then we were ready to go ahead and start the pilot with our students. So now I'll hand it over to Leo.
So Alexander shared and gave you an overview of the process until now. And what I'd like to do is take it forward from here and show you what we created and the type of tasks, the reception tasks that we created. So first we used Moodle, as I said, as was shared with you. We've tried different types of programs and platforms that were more geared towards written assessments. However, where they had question answer sections and platforms. However, that didn't really fit a video and visual type of task that we wanted to create. So we did a little bit of programming, asked students feedback if it was doable to place it here in Moodle, and that's what we ended up choosing. And so you can see the setup here. You can see first, there's one woman and Alexander both sharing that they have their video of a few minutes. First, they have the explanation. There's one piece that I'm signing, which is the questions and the task. We have some task examples and we show them that it's a multiple choice. So first have an explanation of the tasks. So this is just an example of what it looks like. This is the setup. We wanted to make sure that the setup was easy on the eyes, visual. And also you can see on the side that you have the multiple choice videos, A, B, C, or D. So in total, you have these items shown plus the multiple choice videos. And you can freely go to the question, go to the receptive piece. You can click back and forth freely between all of the different videos. You can also enlarge in the videos. You can zoom in. Just like you can see the video of the question or the piece of one or the other, but maybe you feel like it's too distracting to see the other video, so you can enlarge in one video to make sure that it's easy on the eyes, easy to follow. And then when you go to the items, you can click on all the items. You can click on the first one, you can click on the second one. But you don't have to, it only goes forward. You can't go backwards. You also see a panel that slides into the side to the left. It says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so you can also click there to go backwards then. So let's say if you felt like you made a mistake, you still wanted to review the number 1, the first question, you can go back to the first question. So you can toggle through the different questions. We're really happy with this user interface, and it really was quite friendly for the task that we wanted to test. So we had 5 items that we wanted to show. This is the first one. Earlier, Alexander shared how we tested this first with L1 users. We first had the receptive piece. We then created 4 selections of possible topics. We then brought those in to this area, and those 4 sections that we selected became A, B, C, or D. And then we created the question based on that. So we created a question based on the vignette. And this is how we displayed it. So this task was in regards to global, general comprehension. And in general comprehension, you have certain descriptors of what you can do. And then we really appreciated having it in this setup for the global comprehension. The following questions have the same type of setup. So you see here for global comprehension, selective comprehension, detailed comprehension. We followed the same setup. However, it depended, we could test different grids. So like I said, here we went first for the global comprehension, we had the 4 multiple choice, and we used this grid-like setup to make it very easy to follow. And then you had the selective comprehension. So we went to the first piece, and what important information there was about selective comprehension. We took a clip out of that piece just to further highlight certain pieces from the whole larger piece of information. And then there are other details like a search function, or perhaps there was a sign that we wanted to further, like key points that we wanted to highlight. We also had the detailed comprehension, and then there's one called inferencing. So with inferencing, maybe there was not a really clear example from the initial piece. So we would watch the full piece and then gave them some, we cut out some selected pieces for the inferencing. And that was more in regards to possible facial expression or other pieces of information in the whole vignette where they could inference. So this whole comprehension task followed these 4 items. And what was nice is that they could look both at, you could see a nice flow between all of the different types of information there was between the global, selective, detailed, and inferencing. It was nice to base it on one vignette so that they could see how it connected to each other. Once this was designed and created, we wanted to see the results, and we wanted to analyze the selected responses from the 49 students. We also shared this with them at the start. We created 4 groups. We went through the whole task with the 49 students in total. And you can see here the answers that they gave. And we could compare and contrast the answers between answer 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And also to see which vignettes, selections they chose per task. And then the green and the red part was the greens were right and red were incorrect. Earlier, Alexander was sharing, how we came up with this, and then we had answer 4 and 5 was much more complicated, we had to say, because, the tasks. The tasks for task 4 and 5 were more complicated because we had to use constructed action. We had a lot more, it was more 3D, 4D, there was more role shifting. So creating those last 2 receptive tests, we saw for the students were more difficult. And that's why you see more more incorrect answers to second and third. So that was great for us to feed back into our teaching lessons, to see that that was obviously something more difficult for the students, and we're able to further our lessons and give them more support on taking that test the next time. So we were feeding that also back into the materials that we created for our class so that they could have more time to practice constructive action. It really helped us adapt our curriculum. Oh, yes. Alexander just pointed something out. Thank you, Alexander. If you look at 2B, there was also one of the answers in one task that was more difficult. That was in regards to inferencing. There was a woman the woman was signing something in regards to, two of us when we grew up. What was it again? Yeah. There was a question, but the question was about not exactly how long that time frame was, but the question was how long was that time that they grew together. But that really, you have to take that inferencing from the facial expression. And so one would infer that it was for a very long time. They knew each other for a very long time. But people chose that the year was not shown. They chose the answer that it was not said. The question, of course, was signed a bit differently than what we wanted them to infer. So that's why there was a lot of mistakes for that one. So once they went through the test, we wanted to gather some feedback from the two groups on this receptive task. We got quite some feedback, but I will give you the short of it. In general, they said that they really appreciated the setup. They liked how it worked. It was user-friendly. The tasks itself, they felt were very important to test. They said that Gunther signing it was very different because it was very difficult because it was quite different than what they're used to. However, going through the extra explanations and the ABCDs, they said that it helped them further. And they felt that it was very useful for their DGS and that it highlighted difficulties with unfamiliar signs. So it also pointed to vocabulary gaps. So that was the tasks that we created, and thanks for watching.
Thank you very much, Leo and Alex, for your speech. Okay, we went a little farther than the allowed time, but we are now in the Q&A session, so the bigger Q&A session. So I would say if anyone has a specific question for Leo and Alexander, we will take one in now. And then I would ask the other speakers to prepare themselves in case there are other questions for them as well. So this last half hour, we will allow for more questions for all of the speakers. Also, I would ask Tobias to share the link for the questionnaire. So before you go, please do take some time to answer the questionnaire. It's very important for us and also for the organization of the next webinar. So thank you very much. And for any questions, either turn on your video if you want to ask in sign, or add your name or raise hand or whatever, signal your interest. Okay. There's another question from Tony Bloem for Leo and Alex, which is, why do you not ask the students which questions was difficult, so they can keep directing their development? So I suppose the question is, why don't you ask the students which one of the questions that they were answering was the difficult one, so they can eventually focus on which one, on where they should be developing their competence.
Very good question. So we did interview a number of the students, and for example, if it was question 4 and they were a bit confused about the choices, we would ask, which sign they didn't understand, and then we would link that to the difficulty they were having. So suppose it was a sign for chewing gum, for example, we would say, okay, maybe there was nothing in the context that would give you any clue to the fact that chewing gum was coming, right? So it might have been kind of a random sign within that group of choices. That's just one example where we kind of found why it was hard for the students through the interviews.
Okay, I guess that was the answer. Any other question or anyone who would like to ask questions, not only to Leo and Alexander, but also to Claudia Harsh or Carmen Graham? Tobias?
I have two questions. One is to Alex and Leo. Actually, great presentation. Thanks a lot, the two of you. I was wondering, like, how, because you were talking about that you need to do some programming. How did you, which kind of learning platform did you use?
So we use Moodle. And Tobias, do you mean for the matching tasks? You mean to set up the
Like everything you showed, basically
for multiple choice?
Like everything what you showed. So you have different tools, right? So one is Moodle and the other one? Moodle, okay.
We didn't use any other tools.
Okay, good.
It's all made in Moodle.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean we use JavaScript, which go and then iframe, which all just gets piped into Moodle, and obviously this wasn't really that straightforward. And Alex is saying that any kind of programming takes time, right?
Absolutely.
It's better not to try to program yourself. You know, get someone who knows what they're doing, and then it's a lot easier.
So now they only use Moodle.
Yep. Thanks a lot. And the second question is for Claudia. Claudia, you were talking about when for aligning tests to the CFR, so that you need to, when you identify descriptors, that you need to see how they make sense in your local context. Would the same apply when you develop a curriculum based on the CFR? Would you also start, I mean, for example, in our context, we're currently in a big reform, revising our curriculum in the interpreting program. And we have a lot of experience. We have done this now for the last 30 years, but still it's now the right time to align it to the CFR. So basically that's the starting point for you, where you would say, okay, let's go for identified descriptors and let's see how they make sense in the local context.
I would say so. And the handbook nicely has widened the scope from tests towards curricula and all educational materials. So I would say, yes, use your local analysis and your local expertise, and then match this with the CFR and see how far the CFR gets you and where you need to add your local specifics, and make the CFR specific for exactly those points where the CFR isn't specific enough. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Thanks, Claudia.
I also see a raised hand from Carmen, who wants to ask a question. So please, Carmen.
I'll try an international. At the end of your slide, you had you had that grid. And you had one or two numbers, and then you had one A, B, C, and then one said 1 and D. But I'm wondering, For a B1 level, would that be too high of a level if they were able to understand all that? Because I saw one number from 1A, they got 40 versus the other levels. So would you adapt it to their levels? Was the question too difficult or too easy? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Thank you, Carmel. It's a really good question. I mean, I'll try to give you the quick answer. So when we finished the A2, when they finish an A2, right, they've passed A2 and they've entered B1, which means obviously they should be able to do things that are a bit more difficult. But in fact, the students aren't able to reach B1, but they've passed B2. So they're somewhere in between the two levels. So it's kind of like an A2.2. So basically, we need to just call that assessment something different rather than B1 if they're not doing well on that assessment, right? And that's part of our process, right? What we're kind of figuring out what layers of assessment lie between A2 and B1, for example. And we can also determine what the students have, are still having a hard time with. So we also don't know if, what their process is, because they're only giving us one answer, right? So you're getting one answer right or wrong, and then you have it's tough with multiple choice because you don't know why they're answering that, or you don't necessarily know every time why they're getting it wrong, and what they might have chosen if they had a second chance. Basically, we know there's a weakness here, and then the next semester we try to adopt our teaching as such. And obviously, it depends also on the students. It depends on the class and individuals. Did you want to add anything, Leo? No? Okay.
All right, I have a question from the chat. The chat from Peter Hofwerk, Hofwerk Hegel. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So the question is a practical question for Leo and Alexander. I really like this concept of comprehension testing, but in our experience, filming and editing programming takes a lot of time, and thus it's neglected because of high workload. How do you organize that? Do you plan time for it, have an extra budget for it so you can hire extra people for developing it? How do you keep it up to date? Tough question.
Well, during COVID, there was so much happening on Zoom, and we had 2-hour classes on Zoom. So what we tried to do, they wanted to reduce it to 2 hours, but we wanted to keep those 4 hours. So because we had, I believe, 11 students, no, 11 people total that worked on this. So what we did is we took 2 hours of our time to pay them for the filming. So we were able to take advantage of that. After then, we have not worked on it. We've done some of additional stuff ourselves. We've done the filming ourselves. We've had to ask people to do it voluntarily until now. And we haven't been paid or any time. It's just doing little bits at a time and doing it out of our own teaching time.
Yeah, I think everyone has the same budgetary restrictions. And we were lucky that we did have time during COVID. And sometimes when we do have a little extra time, we can do a quick video, but it is time intensive. And when you have to go back and correct things, it becomes even more time intensive because you're having to redo things that have already taken you quite a bit of time. So yes, that's an important question, and something to consider.
Thank you very much for the answer. If there's anyone else who wants to add in more questions or discussion or share their own experience. This is an extra time space for you to take the chance to have an open discussion with the speakers or also with the other attendees in the webinar. Meanwhile, I will take the chance of a little extra question to either Carmel, Leo, or Alexander, those of you who have classroom experience in teaching sign language, which is in the construction of the video portfolio by the students. Do you use any technical equipment or software to provide a detailed feedback on their output? Because many times they like produce a video which is 2-3 minutes long, and while revising it, you see that there are lexical mistakes or grammatical mistakes, syntactic mistakes, and the feeling is it would be useful to provide us a feedback exactly where the mistake happens. But of course, if I have to write or provide a feedback face to face, there's not always the time to go so much in detail. So do you have any idea of softwares or any other technical tool that can be embedded in a Moodle-based platform to provide this kind of feedback?
At our university in Cologne, we do have iCloud that we use. And so within iCloud, we have their portfolios, their videos. They are also labeled. And within those labels, we can then also add a PowerPoint. And then if we give them some homework, they put those. And so we have all different types of folders. And when they have their assignment, and when it's finished, then they let me know. And when I open it, I open up 2 screens. So what I do is while I'm looking at their video, I also open up a recording screen. And I record myself while watching their video. And they say they really like seeing me watching their video because then they get the feedback of my video. And for example, there was one program I remember in the United States that was free when someone's adding Go React. Thank you. But so I don't know if that is still available. Carmel is asking if I can go. I don't know if she will use IS or SL.
I'm look lost. Okay, there you go.
Just to respond to that question, I did mention that we use Blackboard here in Trinity College, but it's our version of Moodle. Instead of using Moodle, we use Blackboard here in the university. So just the question that was asked about the students' work, we are trying at the moment to look into start using Go React. That was mentioned, but unfortunately there's just hesitancy there, obviously due to funding. So we've had to look at other options. So generally at the moment, like the others, the students would sign videos. They would just do a video recording for maybe 3 minutes, and as mentioned, trying to watch it and write down notes for the feedback. I would write physical notes and try to do that, or I would sign a video and then just send that to the students through WeTransfer. but it does take a long time to do that. Obviously, recording videos individually for each student to give that feedback. But I think that the students can then kind of keep a video diary log. And it's good that the students can then go back to those videos and revisit them again to see if the problem that they're having might be a consistent problem. And they can review that. And also when I'm meeting with students, I can also call back to previous feedback videos that they can look at again. So they have that kind of a diary about that, because I think if you just sit and give people feedback in person, they can forget that feedback quite easily. So for me, it's better to have that recording that they can then hold on to and refer back to as they go through the learning.
Interesting feedback. Thank you very much to both. I will think about it. Thank you very much. I also see Alessio Di Renzo wants to ask a question, and not sure if Julia, you turned on your videos because you want to ask a question as well. Would you like to ask a question after Alessio?
Julia wrote in the chat she'd like to explain what they use.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, fine. So I will let Alessio go ahead with his question, and then Julia, I will wait for your feedback.
So just to clarify, this is my name sign. I don't want people to get my name wrong. Thanks, Leo and Alex. I think it was really nice to see the visual of how you did the videos and recordings and put them together, laid them out on your screen. And the question of, expense and time is one that we all have. I was talking with a colleague and we came up with this idea, and we thought, we hadn't seen it before, and I thought maybe this was a nice time to share it. On Zoom, there are lots of videos, and we could probably take a Zoom video that hasn't been shared. I can just obviously you just put yourself on Zoom, create your own meeting basically with only yourself, and then you can record yourself signing in Zoom, and then it would be very clear once you're done if you record that meeting. So then it basically saves a lot of the editing. So that's just one way to I guess shortcut some of the post-production that we all seem to be stuck with. And Alex is saying, great, thanks. This is a great platform to share some of those ideas, and that's a good one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alessio, for your contribution. I also use Zoom, and it uses a lot.
Hi.
Julia,
Can you
please,
see
yes.
me? Great. So I'm a deaf teacher at the university, and we use Canvas. This is our sign for Canvas, and Canvas is fantastic because even you have Sepher levels. You can put the Sepher levels in A1 to A2, B1, B2, and then you can upload the video, and the students' videos record themselves. I receive all the recordings, and then when I open the recording, I can give a scoring, and it automatically assesses, and it gives an assessment label. I don't have to write anything. It's automatically all done in Canvas. And Canvas, I can send it to them via video, any of my responses, and they can also respond in video. And like I said, then there's the Sepher levels, the Sepher descriptions in the beginning to set it up. It's a lot of work, but then I can just click on any of the Sepher levels and or descriptors, and it's very easy to just click on it and it gets automatically embedded into the video that I'm looking at. So I've been using that during my sign language teaching days, and it's very, very efficient, very handy. Like I said, the setup time takes a lot of work, but I love Canvas. So that's one of my big tips.
And thanks, Julia, for that idea. I think we can all benefit, all of us who are teaching and developing materials, both using the Zoom tip and Canva as well.
Thank you very much, Julia. I will leave a link. Yeah, well, Tobias already did so. I suppose the platform is the one that Tobias just added in the chat, or in any way. If you can also add the link to the chat, it's a good way to find more resources for all sign language teachers to have more softwares and materials to work with. And one of the problems with sign language is always not having enough materials for our students to study appropriately. So we always have to adapt one way or the other. So it's good to have more tools to improve our teaching. So if there's anyone else who wants to add their own feedback, questions, we still have a few more minutes for you to ask questions, to discuss. While we wait, I'll take the chance to remind you once more of the questionnaire. You have the link in the chat. I will put it down for you so to find it quickly. It's very important for us, again, to have an answer to this questionnaire so that we can properly prepare the webinar for next year, so it can meet your interest and also the interest of the way in which sign language assessment is changing now. Thank you, Claudia, for being here with us.
Ria, I think there's one question in the chat from Sandra.
Oh, yes. From Sandra, you said?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see it. Okay, I see it now. Thank you. So yes, Sandra Duguy asked a question about tech for independent teacher, technology for independent teachers. So teachers who are not in a university setting or are working with their own tools, I suppose. Oh, Sandra says she can use international sign. Yes, Sandra, if you want, so you can explain a little better what you really want to say. There you go.
Can you see me well? Sorry, the technology here is quite poor. How do I enlarge in this? It's okay. All right. Can you see me? Yes, yes. Great. Yes, I'm here amongst the NSLIT teachers. And I just want to ask, there's many different groups. There's academic groups, but there's also independent teachers. And what's the best technology that we can use? So Zoom would be one of them, but there's Canvas and there's Moodle. Yeah. As a private independent teacher, I'm just wondering technologically, what's best for me to invest in? Of course, it's important if it would be free.
So I think different people will have different preferences. Like we like Moodle here, but obviously we've had different opinions shared in this very meeting. So I believe that the preference is really it's just up to the individual. So I don't think there's a one size fits all.
Yeah, and we chose Moodle because here in Germany, many universities use Moodle. So then there is already a understanding of how it works, and we can share through Moodle. Canvas is also a great one, but if I would use Canvas and most of the people use Moodle, it's not very operable. So we want something that was interoperable.
So, for example, here at the University of Cologne, we do have a different e-learning platform that we didn't choose to engage with because this is more a written language-based platform, which is why we ended up choosing Moodle. So for that reason as well.
Right, yeah, and people from the UK use different things, but it's really great to see that it's so great to have this platform here to share. So wonderful to see your faces and your names. Just thank you all very much. It's been so lovely to be here.
Thanks, Sandra.
If there are any other questions, we still have a little time. Okay, so I suppose if there are no other questions, we can start to wrap up. Thank you very much to all the presenters. Thank you, Claudia Harsh. Thank you, Carmel Grehan. Thank you, Leo and Alexander, for being here today. It was a very interesting day, very interesting speeches. I think we learned a little more again about the CFR for sign language, assessing sign language, following the CFR, and it's a pleasure to be here with you to learn from your experience and to share it with the rest of our audience. Thank you very much also for those of you who have returned to this webinar. We are always happy to see you again. And welcome to those who came here for the first time. We hope you enjoyed your time here. Thank you to the interpreters from Overseas Interpreting, Oliver and Lisa. It's always a pleasure to work with you too. We remind you once again of the questionnaire. It's going to be your nightmare tonight. Thank you as well, Tobias, for the co-organization, to EALTA and the university for funding this event. It's important for us to have these fundings to pay for the interpreters, as well as having the possibility to improve the webinars by having more time and more resources to do this. So thank you very much for everything. If there's nothing else to add, Tobias, I think we can just wrap things up and close. There we go. Okay, so thank you very much to you all and see you next year. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.